All right, good morning.
Good morning.
Hope everybody's doing well. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we will begin our lecture. We have a lot of ground to cover this morning, so let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll get started. Lord, thank you so much for your insight that you have given to us by Koheleth, and the instruction, Lord, to see things rightly in terms of our activities here on the land itself. I thank you, Lord, for Koheleth and his purposeful activity and how he has transmitted this to us um, uh, um, so that we may know how to see things from your point of view. Pray, God, that this would be instructive and productive, and that overall, Lord, you would be glorified in this. We love you so much, Lord, for it's in your son's name. Amen. Okay. So let's begin talking about just discussing very briefly what we talked about last week. We ended chapter 2, and we are entering into chapter 3. And let's go ahead and talk about, just again, touch on briefly what we talked about last week, and then that will grease the skids for us for this week. So I had started asking 4 questions of chapter 2. Specifically at the end of chapter 2, verse 26, right? And I wanted to ask 4 questions. What does Koheleth mean when one is good in his sight, right? And 2, what does Koheleth mean as it concerns the word sinner? And looking at some of the words themselves and what they mean, we concluded that the word good in this sense is not a quantitative thing. As we use in our vernacular, right? When someone does good things, they are a good person. But instead, it is qualitative, right? Same thing with the word sinner that Koheleth means. He doesn't mean it is like, we use it in a very general, broad sense. For Koheleth, it's very technical, right? So one who is good in his sight is a descriptor or an identifier. It's an adjective. It speaks of the quality of a thing. When God looks at a person, he sees that they are good in his sight or in his presence. And we concluded that the one who is good in his sight is the one who fears him, the one who reveres him, the one who acknowledges him, right? That is the one who is good in his sight. Again, the same thing for the word sinner. This is a person who does not fear or revere the face or the sight of God. They are looked at by God as a sinner. This is a qualitative term. Okay? We talked about question 3. What does this entire statement by Koheleth mean? This statement is to encourage the congregation of Israel, who's the primary audience of this book here, to change or strengthen their focus, right? Based upon Koheleth's account. If Koheleth is the richest man at this time, the most powerfulest man at this time, the most influential man at this time, he has all these riches and all of these things, and plus he is the king of Israel. He has been chosen by God to sit in the seat to rule as the ruler of Israel. His life in relation to what he's learning and communicating matters, right? And so this is written to strengthen their focus. And lastly, why did Koheleth place this thought here? This is the discussion portion of Solomon's research project, taking all of the data that he has accumulated and is making conclusions about this data concerning pleasure. That pleasure, in and of itself, if you pursue it, is a useless endeavor, right? Building a legacy so people will remember you is a useless endeavor. Even transferring things to your progeny for the sake of continuing on your legacy is a useless endeavor because you aren't going to be around to see how they're going to spend said legacy, right? So he says the only thing that really matters is God and living for him, because the rest of these things are temporary. Now, let's go ahead and start in chapter 3. And again, chapter 3 is an interesting chapter. I spent about 2 weeks, I was telling Willie B, I spent about 2 weeks listening to the birds. Turn, 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 right? To try to get into the headspace, right? Because this is a very popular verse. I mean, it's been, especially during time of the 60s. Let's go ahead and read chapter 3, verse 1, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at a couple of words here. It says, there's an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven. Again, Koheleth, working from chapter 2, continuing his thought process here. And he mentions that there's an appointed time for everything, right? Let's talk about what this word appointed time means. Zaman is the word here. The root word for this word is zaman. This word is used 3 times. That is this root word of this word here for appointed time. It's important to look at this here because this is one of the reasons why they translated it this way, appointed time. The root word is a verb, right? And it is used in various places all throughout the Hebrew scriptures. That is this root word here. So let's take a look at this verb, and then we'll come back and take a look at the noun that this word comes from. In Ezra chapter 10, verse 14, the word zaman is used. That is the root word for this word. And it is used to underscore that these times that are designated. It says, let our leaders represent the whole assembly, and let all those in our city who have married foreign wives come at appointed times together with the elders and judges of the city until the fierce anger of our God on account of this matter is turned away from us, right? So they designated the nation of Israel was marrying foreign wives, right? They weren't supposed to do that, not because they were foreign, but because they were adopting false deities. And they didn't want these deities coming and invading the land, pillaging the land here. And of course, God is a jealous God, Gana, and as a result of it, they would have been punished based upon the covenant that they made with God. So they came together at appointed times that were designated until the fierce anger of God was turned away from them, right? In Nehemiah 10, we see the same word here, and otherwise it's translated fixed. It says, likewise, we cast lots for the supply of wood among the priests, the Levites, and the people, so that they might bring it to the house of God according to our father's household at fixed times annually, to burn on the altar of the Lord of our God, as is written in the law. So here we have the appointed or fixed times that God has designated to the nation of Israel, right? That they were to come together at certain periods of times, right? And then Nehemiah, at the same time, at the end of the book itself, chapter 13, verse 31, the account of Nehemiah, I arranged for the supply of wood at appointed times and for the first fruits. Again, speaking of these designated times that God has established to the nation of Israel for them to follow. So let's take a look at, so each of the occurrences of this root word of this word here is in the Puel stem, which again is passive. These things occur, right? So these things, this word underscores or emphasizes the times that the Lord gave the nation of Israel that they had to do the feast days and festivals as a nation, right? This is what this root word means in this word, right? So this word appointed time that is written, underscored in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1. This word again is a noun here, not the root word, but this word here. And it occurs 3 other times in the Hebrew scriptures. Okay? Let's take a look at some of the words here, and then we'll make some notations and some comments. In Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 5 and 6, we see this word here in this text. As a matter of fact, it occurs 1 time in Nehemiah, 2 times in Esther. Okay? He says, I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor before you, send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it. Then the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, how long will the journey be, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I gave him a definite, a specific time, right? A certain time. In Esther, we see the same word used here in chapter 9, verses 27 and verse 30 and 31. It says, therefore, they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. And because of these instructions of this letter, both what they had seen in this regard and what had happened to them, the Jews established and made a custom for themselves and for their descendants and for all those who allied themselves with them, so that they would not fail to celebrate these 2 days according to their regulation and according to their appointed time annually. So this was after what's his name was executed in Esther. And because of this particular victory, essentially avoiding being annihilated as a nation, they had set up an appointed time to celebrate this, and this time was called Purim. This was not a part of the law. This was something they established to remember this particular victory that is outlined in Esther. Continuing from in verse 30, chapter 9, same chapter in Esther, it says he sent letters to all the Jews and to all the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, namely words of peace and truth, to establish the days of Purim at their appointed times, just as Mordecai, the Jew, and Queen Esther had established for them, and just as they had established for themselves and for their descendants with instructions for their times of fasting and their lamentations. So according to the word itself, there's an appointed time, a definite time, according to Koheleth, for everything. That there's a fixed or certain time for everything to occur under heaven, right? Koheleth underscores this particular statement with the next statement. And there is a time for every event under heaven. So Koheleth underscoring that there's a definite time, there's a certain time, a specific one for everything. This word time is ayuth. That is in the second statement. This word occurs 296 times in the Hebrew text. Again, this word is a noun, and it can be a time of the day, for instance, like afternoon or evening time, morning time, things like that. Time as we use it, like what is the time? What time is it, right? The time is 9:30, right? Or a particular occasion. This celebration, I think there's a certain celebration going on today. Am I not mistaken about that, right? I'm not going to be here. But it is a particular occasion, right? So that time, or an experience. I remember the time when I was ... right? It is used in all of these instances, right? This word here, that is ayuth, and this word in this context seems to underscore a particular season or an occurrence that happens to humanity, right? So we have fixed times or fixed things that occur. There's a particular time for everything, and there are occurrences that happen, right? Which brings us to the word event. That's not herpes, okay? Herpes is the word, okay? This word occurs 39 times in the Hebrew scriptures, okay? This word, again, is a noun. And what I find interesting is this word is usually translated a desire or a longing. Now that's interesting here, right? So if we were to read this here, it says there's an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every delight or every longing under heaven. Why would they translate it as events, right? Well, I think one of the reasons why this word is translated as event instead of delight or desire is it's not necessarily talking about that specifically. Okay, it's not talking about an emotional disposition or a feeling or something that we have. This is talking about the activities, right? The activities that humanity does or finds itself in. Right? That participates in these things. Okay? Let's talk about the phrase under heaven. Again, this is an idiom here. This phrase occurs 3 times in the Hebrew scriptures. And this phrase is used as an idiom to talk about the location of these events that take place, that these times are found in, right? Now, let me make a notation here just for a minute. Of course, we will read this. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and read it now all the way up to verse 8. Okay? So there's an appointed time for everything, and there's a time for every event under heaven. A time to give birth and a time to die. A time to plant, a time to uproot what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build up. A time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to throw stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to shun embracing. A time to search and a time to give up as lost. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear apart and a time to sew together. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time of peace. Now, I want to make something clear here about this particular section. Okay? Koheleth is not making any moral judgments here. Okay? He's not making any moral judgments or value judgments based upon the activity of humanity. Like, is he promoting that there's a time to kill? Like, no, that's not what he's talking about here. He's looking at this as an observer, right? He's giving us raw data, right? These are the activities that occur under heaven that humanity engages in, right? He's not making a value statement of whether or not they're right or wrong or not. He's just looking at the activity of humanity, right? And coming to these conclusions, okay? Like a good researcher would do, or at least ought to do. Okay? So let's take a look at some of these statements, and then we will make some observations here. From verses 2 to 8, Koheleth compares extremes. 2 sides opposite to underscore the activity of everything. Okay? He doesn't mention things specifically, but instead he brings up broad ideas, broad terms, broad activities. Okay? He brings up a time for birth and death. As you can see, that's activity that occurs and still occurs today, right? People are born, and people pass away, right? A time to plant and a time to uproot. Think of farming right? And laboring in that sense, when people are planting and then they uproot their crops after they've grown, right? Each of these things that are happening are either the beginning of something, the end of something, the building of something, the destruction of something, or the restoration of something. Okay? For instance, to kill, that's physical, taking someone's life, kill. But there's also healing as well. A time to break or destroy, to tear down, and a time to construct and erect and build. To weep and to laugh. I find this very fascinating, considering that these are both together. To mourn and to dance. Think of funerals and weddings, right? In our culture, birthdays, right? And celebrations. To throw stones and to gather stones. Now, I don't think that we do this unless, of course, we're doing some landscaping, right? But in this culture, in this context, they would gather stones, and quite often for memorials, things that they wanted to remember, right? This is found in various places throughout the Hebrew scriptures, right? Whenever there was a victory, they would build and erect a stone. So when they would pass by, they would remember those. Think of memories and things in this sense. To embrace and to shun embracing, or to be far from embracing. To seek out things, or to give up as lost. That seems to be happening to me more often, the older I get. I'm not talking about anybody else. To keep and to throw away. That's what I try to do in my house all the time. Throw away things, right? To keep and to throw away. To keep things of value and to throw away things that aren't of value. To tear apart and to mend. To be silent and to speak. Times where we need to speak less. And there are times that we need to speak more. Times to love and to hate. Times of war and peace. He brings this up, Koheleth brings this up as the observation that these are the activities that humanity is involved in under heaven. Again, without putting any value judgments on them. These are the things that he observes and he sees. Koheleth in verse 9 asks a question. He says this, what profit is there to the worker from that in which he toils? Right? In other words, what is the point of all this activity? Have you ever thought that? I know I thought it at times. What is the point of us living like this and being engaged in all of these activities? What was the point of me, having children? What is the point of me? Well, I know to have children is a good thing, but I could have picked something else, right? What is the point of getting married and settling down and doing all of these things? Why are these things? Why are these things? What is the purpose of humanity engaging in all of these activities? Koheleth makes a statement in verse 10. He says, I've seen the task which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. This is an interesting word here. Again, it's interesting how these, Hebrew is very fluid depending on the context, right? So awa is the word here for occupy. This translated occupy in verse 10. This word is a verb, and it occurs 50 times in the Hebrew scriptures. This word also occurs 2 other times in the book of Ecclesiastes. We've seen this word before, as a matter of fact, in chapter 1, verse 13, although it's translated differently in there. This is Koheleth beginning to outline his activity. Notice how he says this: I've set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. That sounds familiar. That sounds just like chapter 3, verse 1. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. That's interesting. This word also occurs in chapter 5, verse 20 as well. Let's turn there. I will start at verse 19. It says, furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he's also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God, for he will not often consider the years of his life, because God keeps him afflicted. No, it's translated occupied with the gladness of his heart. In other words, he keeps him busy, right? He keeps him thinking about these things. So we have to be careful to make sure that the context fits the translation. In this sense, Koheleth is talking about all of the activity that man is involved in. Okay? And of course, not all of these things that Koheleth mentions are an affliction. For instance, the time to dance, that's an affliction? Yikes. Well, then you can afflict me then, because I love to dance. Okay? Here's the main point, I think, based upon just just looking at some of the language and looking at, I believe, some of the main points that Koheleth is saying here. Koheleth once more points out to his audience, that is the congregation of Israel, his first-hand knowledge of humanity's business. That's the word there for task in the Hebrew. Business on the land. And that this business is true of everyone. Everyone. Okay? There is no exception. Koheleth is bringing up an important point that we all, I think, need to focus on and think about. That it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It does not matter if you have great influence or not. You are still subjected to this activity. In other words, you can't buy out of this. This is the life of humanity. And God has set it up and established it this way. Okay? That we engage in said activity. This lends itself for another philosophical detour. We have to take another detour. Okay? Do you remember this statement? This statement was from a gentleman who had a particular worldview that was opposite of our worldview, a secular humanistic worldview. Okay? And he talked about what life meant. And he says, maybe there's no meaning and we're all stuck here with our boulders. But if we take time to identify what is important to us, what we value, and the goals we wish to achieve, we create meaning for ourselves. And perhaps if we succeed in our existence through attaining these values and goals, we can create legacies for ourselves that allow us to live beyond the end of our physical existence. You create your own meaning, right? You create your own purpose. You create your own destiny. You create that. Why? Because life is so plain, so vanilla, so mundane, so cardboardish. What is the culture and the world itself trying to get out of the rat race, right? Trying to live above and beyond a normal everyday person. I remember I watched this one movie a long time ago called Joe versus the Volcano. It had Tom Hanks in it, right? It's an interesting, I suggest that you watch it. It's an interesting perspective on how the director views life. This guy comes in, everybody's wearing the same shirt, everybody's wearing the same pants, right? He comes in and clocks in, everybody's marching like it's very Kafka-esque, right? Unless you know who Kafka is, he's a philosopher that talks about the mundaneness of life and trying to get out of, said thing. And there's all these zombie lights. He calls them zombie lights. And it's all, the scenery is all drab. It's just one pale color, right? And so when he leaves his job that he's been at, where everybody dresses the same, all of a sudden there's color in the world. It's bright and it's lifelike and things like that. It's like Ted Turner with the Wizard of Oz type deal, right? Black and white, now all of a sudden everything's in color. Wow, it's amazing, right? This is the culture that seeks to want to subject the mundane, that wants to subject the common life. We find this in our religious perspective as well. This stuff. Now, we don't deny God. We just put our spin on it.
Where's your microphone?
Where's my microphone? Oh, it's right here. I'm surprised you could see that.
No,
You could hear it.
Oh, it was like, no. I'm going to call this the philosophy of unique purpose. That's what I'm going to call this. I believe that Koheleth is speaking against this indirectly. Notice this, it's rather long, so please bear with me, but I think this makes the case. If you wake up every day filled with apathy or dread or total boredom, you're probably not doing what you're meant to do. God has created you uniquely, has really good things planned for you. And one of the fruit, that's cute, of the Spirit is joy. Sure, there will be difficult things you encounter that require patience and persistence, but overall, you should have a sense of joy and excitement that fills your day. So if you don't have that, you're not living well. If you go about your days experiencing little fulfillment, you may be wandering from your God-given purpose. Fulfillment comes from doing rewarding, meaningful, purposeful things, from a job that taps into your skills and passions, from a relationship that involves giving and receiving. How many jobs do people work that tap into their gifts and passions? Not a lot of them. From hobbies that are invigorating and mind-numbing instead of mind-numbing. Yes, you'll have to do certain things that are boring and unfulfilling, but if your entire life is gray, you probably need a change. What verses in here are very colorful? I don't find weeping and mourning very colorful, do you? What about building up and tearing down? That seems to be very drab. I mean, he doesn't talk about sailing to Calcutta or anything. Notice this here. Very small, but that's all right. I'll go ahead and read it for you. The philosophy of unique purpose. I put anonymous here because it doesn't matter who it is. I just want you to focus on the philosophy here. We often become impatient and wondering what God's plan is for our lives. But it is not as complicated as we make it out to be. God's plan for us is revealed a little at a time as we follow him. And his plan may look different in different seasons of life. A young man may ask God to direct her to his plan and believes college is a part of that plan. But halfway through college, she falls ill and must spend 2 years in a convalescent home. Is she now out of God's plan? Not if her heart is set to obey him. In that convalescent home, she meets a young man who becomes her husband. They both love the Lord and desire to serve him and believe his plan for them is the mission field. They begin preparation, but halfway through the training, she becomes pregnant with a high-risk pregnancy. Did they miss God's plan? Has the Lord abandoned them? Not at all. Because of the experience caring for a child with special needs, they're able to minister to other families with similar needs. Their mission field looks much different from the one they had envisioned, but it is God's plan for them. They're able to look back and see his hand in every turn along the way. Notice, they're speaking as if this is unique. This ain't unique. There's a time to heal. There's a time for birth. There's a time to throw away what's lost or count it as loss. This is all regular stuff. This ain't unique. God has already informed by Koheleth the activities of humanity already. He's given us the big picture, the broad scope, if you will. I want you to take a look at something here. Notice all these here. You probably can't see them, and that's my fault. Okay, but that's all right. I want you to look at these here, some of these here. God will fulfill his purpose for you 3 ways to trust him. Finding your God-given purpose in life. God has a unique purpose for each of us. What is my purpose in life? God's purpose for your life is unique to you. You're special just like everybody else. God will reveal his purpose for us through the burdens he places on our hearts. God made you for a purpose. Find it. When you realize God's purpose for your life isn't about you, he will use you in a mighty way. Says what? Koheleth is making a point that life is fixed common. That the activities that are found under heaven are for us, and they are common. They're very common activities. Even those who travel the world and stuff like that, they're not doing anything outside of the norm of life itself, even though they may think they are. Which brings us to verse 11. Actually, verse 11a. He has made everything appropriate in its time. Let's take a look at the word he has made first. This is asma. This word is a verb, and it's in the qual active stem. So he has made things beautiful. It's in the third person in the Hebrew text, and the verb is written in the katal, which is perfect. This is more speaking about the event itself that is completed. This is a completed action, but it's not talking about necessarily the time. It's talking about the things themselves, the actions itself. So he has made everything appropriate. Right? In other words, he set up these things to work as they are, for us to be engaged in activities that are common. We can't break out of that, even if we wanted to. Think about chapter 2. Remember chapter 2 where he was building all these things, all these houses, all these gardens. He had all these musicians, all of these concubines, right? For the sake of pleasure. And then he comes to conclude that the sake of pleasure is empty, right? trying to purposefully break out of this mold. And he found that he couldn't do that, because that's not what life is built for. It's not built for that. Let's talk about the word appropriate, yapfeh. The root word for this is yapfah, which is a verb. It occurs 7 times in the Hebrew scriptures. That is the root word of this word here. And it means beautiful, handsome, or fair, right? A person who has beauty in their face, or a person who is very handsome, right? This word here, this root word is used. In the Septuagint, which is kind of interesting, this is the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. Actually, before we get there, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. This word here, appropriate, that's used in Ecclesiastes 3, occurs 43 times, okay, in the book of Ecclesiastes. It occurs one other time in the book of Ecclesiastes. We'll talk about that when we get there, because I don't have enough time. And it is also described as handsome and fair too. So you could translate this as he's made everything beautiful in its time. As a matter of fact, some of your translations might even say that. Okay. Now I find something very interesting. In the Septuagint, that is the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, the Greek word that is used for this word here is the word kalos. Kalos is interesting. It is translated as good in the Greek scriptures. This word kalos is used 168 times in the Hebrew scriptures. And it is used one other time in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 18. If you could turn there, and we'll take a look at it. He says this: here is what I've seen to be good and fitting. That word fitting is kalos in the Septuagint. To eat, to drink, and to enjoy oneself in all one's labor in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life which God has given him, for this is his reward. So Koheleth uses this word to talk about the results of labor and what one ought to focus on. That they should enjoy their life, specifically what they earn from their labor, to eat, drink, so on and so forth, right? This word kalos, again, is pleasing. It can be beautiful, something virtuous that promotes the welfare of an individual, or something noble, okay? So what does it mean when he says he's made everything appropriate or beautiful in its time? This statement by Koheleth, that is, he's made everything appropriate or beautiful in its time, underscores or emphasizes all the activity that is done under heaven from the perspective of what God has prescribed, okay, for humankind. In other words, if we try to think outside of what God has prescribed for us, we're not thinking appropriately about the activities that we do. Consequently, if we look with the perspective in mind of the activities that we are in, raising children, having children, developing friendships, moving, the common life, we see things appropriately. We shouldn't be slaying dragons, according to Koheleth. We shouldn't be looking for mountaintops to conquer. That's nice, right? I mean, it's nice to go mountain climbing. But all of these things are common activities, all of them. Koheleth continues here in verse 11. It says, he's also set eternity in their heart, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning, even to the end. What does this statement mean, especially in light of what we just looked at? Why is this statement put here? We'll talk about that next week. Okay. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we will close out this lecture. Us as human beings, Lord, I admit we can be individuals that look beyond this mundane life, look at our activity and think that we are boring individuals as a result of engaging in these things, trying to look for things bigger, better, faster, farther. And Lord, the things that you have for us, that you've set reality for us to labor in, is really what we ought to be looking to. That should please us because it pleases you that we engage in these. I pray, Lord, that we would think about our activities and how you have given them to us for us to complete, for us to walk in and among, and to be thankful for. We thank you, Lord, so much for just who you are, and that you tell us to live very common in the life that you have created for us. We love you so much. For it's in your son's name.